crois qu'on va pouvoir commencer. Donc, bonjour à tous.
Hello, everyone. And thank you for joining us and being any of you who have joined us for this new workshop. We are really glad to welcome you today at this workshop on Race to Zero dialogue that is being organized by the CNUC. And they accepted our invitation to be connected to this workshop today. This is the first day of the Race to Zero dialogue, which will last for 2 weeks, with many workshops on various topics, with various stakeholders from the whole world, or connecting from the whole world, on various topics regarding transport, health, energy, renewable energy, etc. This is very important, 2 important weeks, gathering the stakeholders on climate issues after what has been done for the climate action. And we wanted to say that we are really proud to be able to organize such an event with local actors, stakeholders, especially in Africa. This workshop will tackle the issues on lessons that we are drawing from our action plan before and during the COVID-19 crisis. Just to remind you that this workshop is being recorded, and it is also being translated both into French and English. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you will see a globe which says interpretation. You can choose the language that you want to listen to. And the whole session is being translated. You also have a chat box, and you can ask any questions or introduce yourself via this chat box during the presentations. And at the end of the session, we will take a time for your Q&A session. You can ask your questions and also send direct questions to our speakers. Before we introduce all of our speakers for today, I would like to first give the floor to our president, the president of Climate Change Association. He's also a senator for the Loire-Atlantique and also president for the UCLG, spokesperson for the UCLG, Ronan Dantec, and he will just give us a word of introduction and introduce climate change. And then we will continue with our topic for today and lessons learned from this the COVID-19 crisis. Ronan, it's over to you.
Thank you, Romain. You understand that you have the translation in English or French with the globe. And I continue my speech in French because it's very important for us, for climate change, to have this balance between the different language, French and English.
Continue into French now. I'm really delighted about this cooperation with the UCLG for the Race to Zero dialogue, which is what it says it means. So let's give a word of introduction. First of all, for those who might not know us regarding climate change. Climate change in the galaxy of all the NGOs and all the structures which you can find, which are fighting against climate change. Our particularity at climate change is that for many years we have been able to gather the global entities of non-state actors working on an exchange of communications, on information, working on common ground. I want to greet Mohamed Adou, who is here with us this afternoon. Also, we're working with companies, with associations, all the non-state actors, as I said, women's groups, indigenous groups, researchers, farmers, etc. And the list of the 9 groups that the UN is recognized for the negotiation regarding climate change. It is key that these groups should communicate, work together. We know that we work together, we cannot reach it alone. So our purpose is really to take part today in this dialogue and to try to develop a favorable environment for climate action regarding mitigation, the reduction of emissions, or on adaptation. This is really the core of our action at Climate Change since the beginning. And this is an action which we are deploying in Africa. And we have been organizing summits for the last 3 years. The first one in Agadir 3 years ago. Non-state summit, we had one in Agadir, we had one in Abidjan, and there was a great summit in Ghana last year. Some of you were there. We were to organize another one this year, but of course, with this crisis, we were not able to do so. And we're already working on another summit for the fall of 2021. According to Jean-Pierre Mbassi, the General Secretary of the UCLG, we really a burden for the last few years now. Now, since the COVID-19 crisis hit and has been impacted all of us, like most people, we have developed visio conferences and digital conferences. And I want to thank Eva and Romain, the team at Climate Change, to put together all these conferences, which have been very successful in the last few years, so that actors could continue communicating and being in touch, so that we would not lose our action regarding climate and this necessary dialogue, ongoing dialogue between the various stakeholders. Our theme for today is very ambitious as it is, and I believe we are in this time when we need to start analyzing the impact of this crisis on the climate action, especially in Africa, both the impact on the coalitions, but more widely on the environment, the necessary environment for our action. And we could maybe introduce a discussion, which the speakers will continue. But what needs to be said is that the crisis, this crisis, has been less heavy and less terrible in Africa than we were dreading. So if the African continent has been impacted, it is not so much on the health, at the health level, on the health issues, even though, you know, there were some problems, but it's mainly on the economical level with the paralysis or weakening of the trade. That's the first thing to mention. We have a continent there that maybe has not suffered quite as much of the health crisis, and it's a good thing. Now, of course, we are still in this context where economy in most countries are highly impacted by the crisis. This morning's figure, for example, talk about -10, -12, a drop of 10 to 12% of the GDP. We are still in the crisis, we are still in a lockdown, and the pandemic continues to spread in many European countries and also in America, as you know. And we will need to look at the economic costs of this crisis for public services in Europe mainly, and whether or not it would not impact tomorrow the need for financing in Africa for the necessary climate action. This is an important topic which needs to be raised, and this is a point of concern as well. I was reading this morning a cry from a leader in Cameroon. This is something that we will need to look into. This is a point of concern. we also have various points of hope, and you will not be surprised by this, but it's of course the election of Joe Biden in America. And in 70 days, we're going to be counting down. The United States of America will come back to the Paris Agreement, will join the Paris Agreement again. That's an extremely important point. I think we were all suffering from this situation, and we are looking forward to the recovery of this mobilization of action for climate, and this will be key in the future decisions. It's not just America. It's interesting to note that also China, which is another pivotal stakeholder when it comes to mobilization on the international level, is also getting some targets of reaching the zero carbon target by 2060, 2050, 2060. If this target is this goal, will these goals rather have an impact also to work in Africa? This is also something that needs to be addressed in our discussion today. So we are in this context, ladies and gentlemen, that could be impacting the economic flow. We hope also that there will be a more ambitious multilateralism regarding climate action, so that as non-state actors, we should not demobilize, but we should be ready to develop new projects in this context, which could be moving in a more positive way. And therefore, our action with all of the actors which we federate and are working together is to strengthen this favorable environment. And even though we have done so already, but to distinguish or identify the particular points of concerns and interest. And we have already done so during our advocacy. We know that access to finance, especially, is a point of concern that cannot be avoided. We're still working on this. We know that there's a lot at stake regarding training. There's a lot at stake also regarding putting together some new projects and accessing finances. We know all these issues, but we need to be even more operational in order to develop a more favorable environment, so that at the end of the day, all that we are aiming at will come to the level of our expectations. This is for Africa, because it's a continent, as we know, which do not contribute that much to the to carbon emission, but to some extent they do. But this continent is impacted in terms of adaptation. So this is just to give you an idea context in this introduction. I'm really looking forward to our discussion, and I think we can be more ambitious now to face this challenge. Thank you very much. Ronan, thank you for your presentation. Just to remind everyone, we have a lot of people who have connected now. Thank you all for joining this meeting. This is being recorded, and remember that you also have an interpretation possibility by clicking yes on the globe. Thank you, Ronan. We will now start with our panel. This workshop is part of the Race to Zero dialogue. And today we will see which lesson to draw from the climate change action in Africa in this crisis context. This event will run for 2 weeks. So please check on the chat box, where you will find the full program of the Race to Zero dialogue. And now I will introduce our speakers and our various panelists. Thank you, Eva. Okay, there we go. So our speakers for today will be Titi Lope, who is the Executive Director of the Center for 21st Century Issues in Nigeria. We will also have Patience Alifo. She is the founder of Greenful Innovation Africa.
African Circular Economy Network au Ghana, basé au Ghana.
She's based in Ghana. We will also have Sylvestre Kwame Kwasi, who is the director of the Observatory of African Mobilities in Abidjan in the Ivory Coast. We will also have Balkissou Bouba, and Mohamed Mbou, who is a special advisor to the Secretary General of the UCLG Africa, and Tara Kaitano, Senior Professional Officer.
Climate change, energy and resilience pour ICLE Africa. Et en clôture,
And as a conclusion, we are fortunate to have with us today Nigel Topping, who is the high-level champion from the UK, from the COP20 to the British team of the COP26, and he will give us a word of conclusion. Thank you all for participating. Now let's start. I'm just going to give you an introduction on the various activities which we have carried out in the previous months with our African coalition. And then I will ask each of our speakers to give us a word of a comment or reaction. Where are we coming from, really? I want to give a word of background. What's our history? What's the history behind these coalitions? In 2018, we organized the first climate change summit totally dedicated to African stakeholders that took place in Abidjan in the Ivory Coast. And this is when we decided that we would develop a coalition that would be specifically an African coalition in order to gather non-state actors around various sectors of activity to promote climate action for fighting against climate change in the area of energy, transport, education, etc. We developed about 10 coalitions. And in each coalition, we had various actors. As is always the case with climate change, we always gather local authorities, people from the business world, from the association world, researchers, youth workers, women's groups, etc. We always seek to keep a balance between the various stakeholders and the main groups recognized. So we all have roadmaps, and we've been trying to identify goals per sector to try to share best practices between the various groups and also through our websites. As you all know, we were meeting on a regular basis every year. We were mobilizing these coalitions, but in 2020, as you all know, we were not able to do so. We were able to have our annual summit. So we were not able to gather our coalitions, which is why we decided to move to the virtual workshops, a bit like everyone else, and to try to keep some originality and make things as easy as possible and approachable for everyone to join, which is why the series of virtual workshops that we have been running since July, once a week, regarding the various themes, the various topics, and with the participation of the various coalitions. And that enabled us to get in touch, to touch base with the various coalitions, just to see how they were doing, to see whether their project, their climate action was still running, how they were impacted by the health crisis, of course, and what was the situation each one of them at a time when we were facing great difficulties in getting in touch with our community. So that was really the first purpose of these workshops, in order to touch base again with our community. And when a lot of questions were raised last May, June, and even July of this year.
Très vite, nous nous sommes rendus compte de la richesse.
So we very quickly realized that in the depths of these exchange and dialogue that we were having, we soon realized that this crisis was impacting people at a different level depending on their situation and context. We thought maybe at first that we were all going to be impacted and affected in the same way. Ronan Dantex, Mr. Senator, was saying that we were concerned at first with the situation in Africa, and soon we realized that things were very different from one place to another. So just for that purpose, it was interesting to listen to everyone's feedback. But what stood out was that there was a real consensus regarding the need to pursue our climate action, and an awareness that, yes, we were going through a major crisis, but that our climate action was to continue as a non-state actors. Therefore, this virtual space really turned out to be something that was very needy and was very flexible and helpful, and helped us to stay in touch and continue mobilizing our community. As you can see here on this slide, you see a few key elements of what we have done in the last few months as part of these virtual workshops. As you can see on this slide, we had around 1,500 people, participants altogether, which is pretty much what we would have had in terms of attendance in a normal summit. But this was virtual workshop with participants coming from 103 different countries around the world. Of course, mainly from Africa, or at least connecting from African countries. 45 different African countries actually took part in these workshops, quite a few Europeans as well, but 24 from Asia and Oceania, and from the Americas as well, 12. We had a lot of various actors as usual, and also as usual, I would say we'd had a lot of NGOs and local governments. We've always had an easiness in mobilizing these stakeholders in our various activities. We are also very pleased that we were able to reach other actors, mainly people from the research area, people from the business field, from the research field, who were quite active and very committed during these virtual workshops. Next slides, please. Now, for this particular workshop, we sent a survey, a sort of questionnaire to all of our participants for them to tell us. And you can see the results there on your screen. This is the results of the questionnaire which we run during the workshops. So what stood out was, what did people get out of these virtual workshop? Contact, knowledge, a need for networking. It came out very strongly. This is why we always try to keep it open. Sometimes we have sound issues because everyone can speak. We realize that people need to be in touch. They want to get in contact. Of course, access to information. We've always done everything both in French and in English, which is really key. It's so important to make the effort at least to be bilingual, if not more, when we can. And of course, adaptation is another effort, especially during this time
nous amène à réfléchir à notre
when we
à nous adapter.
even more about our possibility and capacity of adaptation and capacity for resilience, and what we would need to do in this context of climate change. So this is really what we could say, the main themes of what stood out during our survey. A lot of interesting things that we will be explaining documents soon from all the lessons to be learned from all these sessions. For example, the importance of food chains. Forgot the word in French now, but the food chains, networks, how this was impacted by this crisis. It was very interesting, all the feedback that we got on this. And I would invite you to continue following on our website, the results of all our surveys of what we were able to realize throughout this survey. So without any further ado, I would like to now hand the floor to our panel. And first of all, to Tara Caetano, who is the Senior Professional Officer for Climate Change, Energy and Resilience. ICLE Africa has been a very key actor, stakeholder, especially in the energy coalition and the agricultural food coalition with regular activities. Tara, now, thank you for being here. And I just wanted to ask you, what are the lessons that you're learning from this last 2 months in terms of local activities, how the local authorities had to face these crises, and how did this affect or not, or to which extent did it affect the climate policies and the climate policies in the local authority? Thank you.
Hi, Roman. Thank you so much for the invitation and also for the question. And before I start, maybe just to say a big congratulations to Climate Chance on the series of webinars that you've been running. As you've shown, and what we're also seeing at ICLE Africa is, even though it's very difficult to, at this point, engage with each other, it's really important to keep these conversations going and to keep the knowledge flowing. So some of the lessons that we've been learning over the last few months, local governments are really at the forefront of implementation and are at the forefront of this pandemic and crisis. And it's become even more apparent the key role that local governments play in dealing with emergencies and dealing with crises. And I think the reflection on what that means for the climate emergency is something that has been very apparent for the local governments that we work with. At the same time, the local governments across the continent have been dealing with what is now their business as usual, which includes dealing with the effects of climate change already. During this pandemic, we had local governments in Uganda also struggling through a number of very devastating droughts, We've had local governments in South Africa at the same time dealing with wildfires that are ravaging through their municipalities. So the climate emergency has become a reality and something that people have had to deal with, even though we've been dealing with the pandemic. So what we've seen is the local governments that we work with, our project cities and our member cities, particularly Africa, we've been amazed by the links that they've been already making between the pandemic and the climate crisis. What it's also shown is what we thought was previously impossible on the continent, hosting virtual workshops, engaging, following through with implementation, has been shown to be possible. We are, of course, all learning in this new space, and as you said, it's not always perfect. You know, sometimes people can't find the link to the call, or the interpretation doesn't work. But what we have shown is actually possible, and that people are actually wanting that kind of engagement. So it's so important for us to continue doing what we do. Rwanda has definitely, in my mind, shown the way in terms of their climate leadership, being the first African country to submit their revised NDC in 2020. So I can reflect on that to say that, you know, even though we're dealing with the pandemic, people are still on the ground moving towards dealing with the climate emergency, especially through the official processes of the UNFCCC. We're seeing a lot of local governments thinking about how they can change their institutional structures to become better prepared to deal with emergencies. One lesson I can reflect on was from the Cape Town municipality that had to deal with severe droughts in May of 2018. And in dealing with that particular emergency, they could then, through the COVID-19 crisis, revisit and revitalize an old task force that they had created in that time. And that made them better able to more quickly and efficiently engage and then also respond to the crisis. So my one hope is that even though it's been a devastating year for us in terms of what we've had to deal with the pandemic, that at least we're thinking about the structures that we can create institutionally for us to more quickly and more effectively respond to emergencies. And hopefully that these task forces can be used to respond to the climate emergency when they need to. We're also seeing that on a more sort of global scale, the Africa-EU partnership is also strengthening. And we're seeing quite a lot of resources that are coming through that partnership, most of which also are responding to the serious problems that we have around access to energy. So we're seeing that there are certain projects and programs that are prioritizing spending within the access to energy space and making it more easy for cities to respond to their key health services and keeping the lights on for those particular health services. The European Union's external investment plan, which is currently operational, is expected to generate up to 44 billion euros of additional investment in Africa. And this is specifically for low carbon and resilient infrastructure in 5 key areas, being sustainable energy, sustainable agriculture, sustainable city, private sector development, and digitalization. And in addition, there are a number of key financial instruments that are also being developed, not only by the European Union, but also additionally by a number of key financiers in the space. So I think even though we have seen a standstill in terms of the actual physical events, what I can reflect on is over the last few months, we are seeing things a bit differently, and it seems that we're keeping the momentum going.
Okay. Merci Tara pour ces.
Thank you very much, Tara, for this, your experience and feedback. More concretely, how do you, since you have a technical assistance as well for local collectivities, how did you manage to adapt to this context to pursue with your work and at the same time on the technical aspects, but also on the networking part? And I also wanted to ask you, perhaps, it's very interesting what you said on the funds, the European funds that are going to be accessible, and how are these funds more accessible for local collectivities, namely the ICLEI Africa members?
Okay, thanks. So to start with the first, your first question, we've really had to try and elevate the work that we do and become pioneers in some way in terms of the techniques that we've had to start using in the virtual space. We've really had to push ourselves at ICLEI Africa, but also our member and our project cities to the edge of what we thought was possible in terms of engagement. Nothing can really replace face-to-face meetings, and how quickly you can engage with stakeholders, get to know stakeholders, but also the ease and efficiency of actually getting things done in person. But, as what we've seen at ICLEI Africa is that you can, through the development of new techniques and using new methods, keep that engagement going somewhat. It does take quite a bit longer to sort of move on because it's generally easier when you are face to face, but we definitely have been keeping things moving. In terms of these virtual means and methods that I'm speaking of, at the beginning of July, we launched a webinar series in collaboration with a number of our partners on building sustainable cities during and after a pandemic. And this webinar series was very well received by the local governments that we work with, many thanking ICLEI Africa and partners for providing the space for them to get together, to hear from experts, but also very importantly to engage with each other. And now also to move, to put another hat on as the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa Secretariat. This is also a space where under the initiative, we've been trying to bring local governments together to have the space to engage, because what we're finding is that that mayors, but also technical staff at municipalities are really wanting to learn from each other and to engage even on a virtual space. We also have many resources and trainings that have been conducted, some of which have been through the local Climate Solutions Virtual Congress that is happening at the moment. And to those of you that haven't registered or logged into the virtual event, I do welcome you to do so, where you can find a lot of resources on financing for change. So how to unlock finance at the local level, including some trainings on climate finance and others. Another means in which we've used to really keep the engagement and communication going is through WhatsApp groups, which has worked very well for projects and keeping implementation going on the continent. We've also working very well with local organizations on the ground, CSOs, support organizations that are also helping us to maintain the momentum for our projects. And for with some of our projects, we have, and this is also true for the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa, we've managed to also set up processes which allow us to subsidize the cost of data for some of our local government officials, knowing that most of us are working at home and therefore not able to connect to our organizations or municipalities' free Wi-Fi or resources. We have also thought about this and tried to make it possible for people to connect at a lower cost to them.
Okay.
And then your second question there, so the question around financing and accessibility of funds and finances. So this is one thing that we're discussing at length at Locks for Africa, given that that's the theme. And in terms of accessibility, the European Investment Fund that I spoke of is accessible in the way that it is available for people to apply for those funds. But in terms of the capacity that it requires, it still then needs people that are familiar with up project proposals, etc. And this is really where we see the key gap currently, and where we as ICLEI Africa, but also through the Cabinet of Mayors, are putting a lot of resources into training officials to write these project proposals.
Ok, merci beaucoup Tara. Bon, ce que j'entends de ton retour d'expérience, c'est d'abord une...
Thank you very much, Tara. What I hear from your feedback is a great ability of the local collectivities to adapt and to continue working for climate, for the climate, although there are many obstacles, and then a raising of awareness and maybe an acceleration because of the context, but still difficulties for some territories and players to find the financing. So it is true that by inviting local collectivities to participate to events taking place currently by ICLEI Africa and that tackle these subjects, there's a lot to be learned, and I invite you all to take part. Thank you very much, Tara. To continue, I'm going to give the floor now to Titilope Akosa, Executive Director of Center for 21st Century Issues. So Titilope is a member of the Finance Coalition, and she's very involved in these topics. Can you hear me, Titilope?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me too? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly. Oui.
Great. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Titilope, je voudrais vous poser la question de qu'est-ce que vous avez appris?
I wanted to ask you the question, what have you learned in the last month that you participated to our workshops because you were very present for climate change and lately the access to climate financing? I know it's also your main topic. What is the role of women? What have women brought in the COVID-19 crisis and in your country especially? Thank you very much, Titilope.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for this question. For me, joining the climate change virtual workshop, it has been really rewarding. I've learned a lot from what people are doing around the world, especially from my colleagues in Africa, and how people have been able to cope despite the lockdown and the scarce resources in terms of finance to do what they needed to do. And then a lot of people who have been, a lot of countries who have been under lockdown, it's not been easy in terms of the realities at the local level, in terms of food security and so many other things. And a lot of people have challenges in terms of their work. So it's something that I have had around the world on this virtual space, and also how people are keeping up with their projects on ground despite the lockdown. So these are some of the important experiences that people have shared on this workshop, which we have learned from and which we have also brought back to what we are doing in Nigeria, because also we were part of our country was under lockdown, and we also found out that a lot of people could not have access to their daily livelihoods, and so these are some of the things that we shared also, and we have also been able to learn from others too, basically. And for women, we women, we have learned a lot of things during this COVID, and one big thing that we learned, it's really about household food security in the process. We found out that the lockdown has made it virtually almost impossible for people to have access to food. And a lot of us should be aware of what has happened in Nigeria in the last few weeks, where there's a lot of unrest and people started busting into warehouses where palliatives were kept, and people have started helping themselves because there's much hunger in the land. And a lot of people are complaining about police brutality. So I remember that during the lockdown, there were a lot of researches that were done, and they have said that there's going to be a lot of restiveness after the lockdown, and it's like it's happening in Nigeria, and we're still trying to cope with it as it were. For women, we have learned a lot of things. So, like I said, the first thing is really about household food security. In times of crisis like this, we need to look for a strategy as ensuring that our households continue to have that supply of food, so that we will not degenerate into anarchy, because what we have seen in the last 2 weeks is a big lesson for us. Again, we have also learned that in this COVID era, we have more men being positive for COVID. So we have women taking much care in terms of COVID management. And now that for Nigeria, we are doing more of home-based care for COVID. So there's an additional burden on women in terms of trying to also ensure that household is safe from the infection, and then care about their families and children, and also provide food for the family. These are very important things that women have learned during this COVID times. And then we have also learned that as we move into the post-COVID era, and as we have opened up our economy fully, we are expecting to have a lot of out-of-school children, because a lot of our children have not been in school for months. Some of them, of course, have already, some of them are pregnant now, and to go back to school is going to be very, very difficult. So we are also trying to work with all stakeholders to see what women can do to support some of the women who may be dropouts, even when they say let the school come back. Some of them may not be able to come back. So we have also planned how we are going to start tracing, and to ensure that those who are not in school, what is their problem? Is it as a result of pregnancy or lack of funds or whatever it is? So what can we do to assist in that area? We are also working with the government and other stakeholders to do this.
Okay.
Apart from, you want to say something, or you want me to continue?
No, I was, if you are, pardon, si vous avez fini.
If you have finished, in fact, we don't have so much time, so maybe we're going to go to the next person, but you have 1 minute more if you'd like to continue, please.
Okay. Okay, so we are looking at that, and then we have also been able to work with women around climate finance, because during the lockdown it wasn't easy, but after the post-lockdown, and then we started opening up the economy, we found out that women, local communities need climate finance, because in between we were able to work with the stakeholders and the young people to review Nigeria's NDC, which is still ongoing, We're also starting a long-term vision for mitigation for Nigeria, which for the first time we are putting gender into that. Now for finance, basically we have been able to train our local women climate finance and the Green Climate Fund. And now we are trying to put together what we call locally led climate finance strategy for local women. And apart from that, we are also trying to ensure that funding climate finance gets straight to the local community. So we've started that process. We have trained a lot of them. I think we've trained over 100 women during this post-lockdown, and we have formed ourselves into a community of practice on how to ensure that local women access climate finance and that climate finance gets down to the bottom to the local communities. And one important lesson that we need to key in is to, which we are also using at this period, which we have learned. We have learned that it's also very important to listen to local communities. Listening to them will help us to understand what kind of financial instruments we can work with concerning climate finance for them. And then what are their issues and concerns concerning finances? And then we have also understood that we need direct access to the local communities, not having private sector take over that direct access on their behalf. That's some of the big lessons we're learning in this process. Thank you.
Merci. Merci Titi.
Thank you very much, Titi Lope. This is, so what came out from what you said is that, of course, women have been on the front line, of course, during this crisis. And the major role that they have, that's the role that they have held. And I invite everybody to follow what Titi Lope is doing in Nigeria in terms of capacity building training sessions, organizing, facilitating access to climate fund, namely for groups, women groups. It's very interesting. And I believe that we can learn a lot from that and maybe replicate these examples in other African countries. So we talk about, this is why we talk about these coalitions. It's important to have examples, positive examples in like the ones in Nigeria, and maybe put people into contact to do so. So people need networks, and this is why we're here, and we give the floor to inspiring people like Titi Lope Akosa. Thank you very much. We can also answer to more questions a little bit later. I would now like to give the floor to Patience. Patience Salifo, founder of Green Fuel Innovation Africa and Country. She's a representative of the African Circular Economy Network as well. And Patience is active in education, mobilizing youth as well, in the Coalition for Circular Economy. And this is why we have invited her today to take part in these discussions. And what I'd like to ask Patience is, first, as a young leader, but involved as well in a startup, how does Green Fuel Innovation Projects succeeded to adapt and continue move forward in the last month in Ghana? How did you do so? Thank you. The floor is yours.
First of all, I want to thank the Climate Chance team for this wonderful opportunity, for giving me the platform to speak. So first of all, I want to be sure if you can all hear me. Thank you. Okay. So as Romian introduced me, I'm Patience Salifo, and I'm based in Ghana. I'm the founder of Green for Innovation Africa, and I founded this at the age of 19, and I turned 24 this year. So that means that I've been in the industry for more than 4 years. As a young teenager, I developed the passion to take up climate action, and that is how I was able to establish Green for Innovation Africa. As a young startup, we're not having the support, but with consistency, attended conferences, attended summits, we've been able to build some network, and that was what we leveraged on. Fortunately for us, in this year, 2020, we received some support from a pitch competition that we joined that was in February 2020. We received 5,000 US dollars, and that was able to help us during the crisis. So during the COVID-19, basically in Ghana, schools were closed down. Myself, I'm still a student at Ghana Institute of Management and Public Administration. And one of the things Green for Innovation does is mobilizing young people, especially young people like myself, in various institutions. We gather to brainstorm and come up with ideas that will help smart city or come up with innovations that will solve climate change. Because of the lockdown, we were unable to meet. Mostly we meet every last week of the month to brainstorm. But during the lockdown, we're unable to meet. And during the lockdown, many people had the passion to watch movies on Netflix. Especially young people like myself, we love fancy stuff. So during the lockdown, we're like, oh, schools are closed down. So there's a time for us to watch movies. Like we were able to watch series of movies. So most of them were not passionate to attend, the online workshops that we organize, because most of them, their focus was on the movies and the excitement about being locked down. Some people had different challenges because, especially in the rural areas, most of them were having less access to energy for cooking. And that is one of the main focus Green for Innovation Africa does. What we do is that we provide access to clean cooking energy for domestic and commercial purposes. And we use agricultural waste instead of trees to produce clean energy, that is clean briquettes for women, especially those in the rural areas. And we also train some of the women to learn how to, produce the clean energy. And in 2019, that was in February, we had a support from Green Africa Youth Organization to train 7 women in the Ashanti region to produce clean energy. And the vision is to expand to other regions. But during the COVID-19, all these things stopped because we were being locked down. We couldn't have access to the women in their various rural regions. Myself, I'm in Accra. So traveling to other rural regions, it takes long distance. And there was restriction on traveling. So we couldn't travel to other places to visit the women. So we stopped the training of women and educating women in the rural areas. These women are having so much problem that they can't have access to clean energy. So some of them go in search of firewood. In Ghana, we have something called the firewood that is used. Some of them, they have like local forests around them that they go to gather firewood to cook meal for their family. So during the lockdown, some of them couldn't even go out to gather this firewood. And this was one major problem. Most of them were not having money to even cook meal for their family. So, the COVID-19 came with different challenges based on your community, based on your country, what your country is facing. The government in Ghana was able to do something like support some of the people, some of the women with food, but it wasn't enough. Most of them were still complaining. So we faced 2 major problems as a startup. First of all, we're not able to organize our monthly workshop for the young people in different institutions. And secondly, we stopped our training program for the women in the rural area. And as a startup too, one of the main, our goal is to produce clean energy. So we couldn't produce the energy again because we couldn't go out to the factory or wherever we are producing to produce the energy. So these are some of the crises that we face as a young startup in Ghana.
Merci Patience. Et peut-être pour ouvrir.
Thank you, Patience. And perhaps to go to the next step, how do you see things in the current context? How are you going to be able to adapt and continue working on the level of your organization?
Thank you so much for the question. In Ghana here, the COVID was not, something that was so much here. It didn't really disturb us. The figures were down. So it really helped us. The government was able to open back businesses and open back, a lot of things, but the schools are not open yet in Ghana. My school itself, we've not been schooling since January. Like when the thing started, since January to now, we are not even having online lectures. The government says till further notice before schools will resume. So you can see how much I've stayed home without learning. It's the webinar that Climate Chance other organizations have been organizing that I've been joining to keep myself, renewed in whatever I'm doing. And that has really helped me as a young, person that is passionate about climate action. But what about other young people who are staying home, who don't know about these opportunities, who are not even passionate to even access the webinar that is going on free, or who don't even have access to laptop, to internet, to even learn what we are doing? So as a young startup, what we do is that we have the WhatsApp group chats that, most of the young people in Ghana here, they are good with WhatsApp. So we have WhatsApp groups that I post most of the opportunities there, like the webinar that we are currently having, to the WhatsApp group for them to get aware of what we are doing. And currently, I don't know whether some of them are here. I share some of the link with them for them to join. So I'm helping them in a way to get to know what is happening around the world, the opportunities. Even though there's COVID-19, we can still take action. We can still do something together virtually. So that is one of the solutions that I did. And with the production of our clean briquettes, good enough, our product is now in the market. We now have products in the market, and we're able to partner with an existing company. Then we're able to partner with them to have access to the machine to produce our briquettes. And now we have the products in the market. But because the crisis was, happening before our product was ready to get to the market, it's difficult to access the people because most of them, it affected their finances. Most of them don't have the money to purchase our product. So that means that we need to reduce the price of our product for most of them to be able to purchase. And we know as we gradually do that, we're able to penetrate into the market and also get other people to, patronize our product. So that's what we are doing. And also, we also applied for some funding opportunities from organizations like One Young World organization that they're helping women like myself in the SDG 5 to support us to, skill up and grow up. And I'll admonish, the senator or the president of Climate Change to, speak to our government to help young people, young female who are having ideas to support us to be able to impact more women, impact young people like ourselves. Thank you.
Merci, merci Patience pour ton témoignage.
Thank you, Patience, for your testimony, and I'm glad to hear that you are relaying the activities of climate change to other young people, to your colleagues in Ghana who were not able to access the teachings online. Thank you for sharing, Patience, and we will come back to you during the Q&A session. Now we need to move on. Time is ticking. Our last speaker is Sylvestre Kwame Kwasi, who is the director of the Observatory of the African Mobilities. And the reason I wanted Sylvestre to speak today was for a particular reason, actually. Let me just introduce Sylvestre first, and then I will give him the floor. The Mobility and Transport Coalition of Climate Change continues their virtual activities like all the others, but in the Ivory Coast, they were able to continue their activities on site because it was possible. And because for the last few years, we had already done quite a thorough work regarding mobility and transport. And this is what Sylvestre is going to be sharing now. But in a nutshell, what happened in Ivory Coast is that on the international scene, there is an initiative called PPNC, which is a global initiative grouping various stakeholders in the area of transport and mobility. In connection with the champion and the UNFCCC, they have a global roadmap for the decarbonation of the area of transport and mobility. So at Climate Change, we decided that it was an interesting tool, but that it would be even better to replicate this same tool to other countries, that is to take the overall strategy for decarbonation of the transport field and to transpose this to other countries. And we did that in Morocco. Since the summit in Abidjan, we have been able to support the stakeholders of the mobility and transport area to develop a low carbon strategy for Ivory Coast. Again, with all the non-state actors possible in Ivory Coast, whether they be startups, local authorities, government researchers, people from the association background, in connections with the Ministry of Transport, which led to a very interesting work. Okay, now I would like to let Sylvestre explain to us more in details what has been done in Ivory Coast. Sylvestre has been one of our pillars, really, for implementing this strategy and this work in Ivory Coast. Thank you, Sylvestre. It's over to you. Thank you very much, Romain. Thank you to Eva and to all of our participants, to the senator as well. I'm Kwame Kwasi Sylvestre. I'm the director of the Observatory of the African Mobilities, the Mobility Coalition working with climate change. As Romain was saying, as far as the Mobility and Transport Coalition is concerned, we have quite an important and thorough tool, which is a roadmap for mobility and transport. And therefore, in 2006, after the Bonn summit, we had this global roadmap, which was then declined in various continental roadmap, the European roadmap, the Sub-Saharan African roadmap, and then we had local declination. So in 2017, we were in Agadir, and the mobility and transport sustainable mobility roadmap was presented. And it was really during the first African summit in July 2018 in Abidjan that the mobility and transport coalition with all the Ivory Coast stakeholders decided and committed to deploy or to develop a roadmap for Ivory Coast. So after Morocco, it was really becoming the second roadmap for Sub-Saharan Africa. So this process was started in March and April of 2019. And the purpose of this roadmap is to have a vision for sustainable transport by 2050, because we're working alongside the Paris Agreement by 2050. Therefore, we know that we realized that the roadmap had 8 axes, main axes. So the Ivory Coast decided for 10 axes for the roadmap. We added the security and the education axis on our roadmap in Ivory Coast. And this was presented in September and October of 2019 during the Accra Summit. At the Accra Summit, we presented our roadmap. And before we could move on to the next step, which would be to quantify the gain in terms of gas emission as we implement our roadmap and what this could add, even in this context of this health crisis. Yet the coalition of mobility and transport of climate change with the local authorities in Ivory Coast were committed to start some initiatives and process to be able to continue the project of this roadmap for mobility and transport in Ivory Coast. It's called Emergence Low Carbon Emergence for Sustainable Transport. The process was very successful. We started with state and non-state actors altogether, universities, local authorities, companies, etc. And contrary to others, we were able to get a strong support from state actors. I'm talking about the Ministry of Transport, Ministry of Environment, and the Ministry of Sustainable Development. And when we developed that process, we wanted to make it more local, to make this roadmap applicable to our various territories. We therefore initiated various local workshops, and we identified 3 cities in the Ivory Coast to be able to present our roadmap to the local authorities to get their feedback and get their concerns so that we could start this. So we also had, we have Cocody. We also have another virtual workshop in Bouaké in the center of the Ivory Coast, and another workshop in the north with the city of Odiene. So for this work has been presented on October 6th during a national workshop, gathering state actors with the support of the Ministry of Transport, the Ministry of Environment, and also the non-state actors. It was important to highlight this because that roadmap, it really is important for Ivory Coast. As part of this great project for the Great Abidjan for urban mobility, they have been using our roadmap to get some ideas for the rest of the Ivory Coast. So it's been an important move, and the actors of the Ministry of Environment also want to use this sustainable mobility roadmap through the second experience to help the Ivory Coast. Just to say that even during this health crisis period, even though it was difficult for all of the states, including ours, but the coalition was able to continue working on site, in situ, and also through virtual workshops by making these results available. We've been presenting the results of this roadmap. We've been running through webinars and to see how we can continue our process. So this is just to say a few words about our experience regarding sustainable mobility, inspired from the roadmap, the world roadmap around the 8 axes. And for us in Ivory Coast, we have also added 2 other main sectors, including our specific issues in the country, gathering also all the actors. We want to tackle the issue of road security, road safety, to stop the high levels of road accidents. Thank you, Sylvestre. Very interesting. And for us, we are very proud to have been able to support you and help you in the development of this Ivory Coast roadmap for the last 2 years. And to also realize that the project of the Great Abidjan program is using this roadmap to even implement their own decisions. Maybe a more technical aspect, but which is worth mentioning, and I want to say this especially because Nigel Topping, our high-level champion, is here with us today. This roadmap concerning mobility and transport could possibly influence the national contribution of the Ivory Coast state to the Paris Agreement, the new SDGs, which is NDC, which is expected for the next COP. How will this take place, practically speaking? How could we better work together in order to have the feedback, the monitoring from the basis, from the local authorities all the way up to the national authorities and all the way back to the UN? Yeah, thank you, Romain, for your question. It's a key step for our roadmap development, which really is added value to this roadmap. Compared to the Moroccan experience, the question, of course, is how to quantify what has been gained from this. What fruit did it bear? First of all, we need to underline the interest shown by the state government, the state actors. On October 6th, when we were presenting this roadmap, the Ministry of Environment communicated about the methodology of the NDC and showed the contribution of the roadmap to be able to integrate it to their own process. Climate change and the experience of our roadmap has been supported by the national community through the Ministry of Sustainable Development and Transport. What happened, practically speaking, at this stage of the project, we've been supported by the IDRI in Paris, and during that time, with the IDRI, we will be able to film the objectives, to follow the objectives. Out of our 10 axes, we have identified long-term goals, so we will be able to meet these objectives, to quantify them, and through a business as usual model from that process to see how we will gain in terms of emission reduction as we implement the roadmap through all of the various actions, state actions. What would be the gain? What would be the added value? So this is what we've been doing, practically speaking. We are just collecting the data at the moment, social data, transport data, economic data. And these data will help us to integrate them and to come up with some BAU model to quantify things. And it's been an important exercise because what we have been doing and this work we've been doing it will be done in collaboration with the Ministry of Environment, especially the Commission of Fighting Against Climate Change. So that's been an important step. We have just concluded our presidential election. So by the end of this month of November, this process, which had been started before the election, will need to continue, so that by the end of December or at the latest next January, we'll be able to present all of our results to the national community as part of our roadmap. So this is an important exercise that we've been running at a national level, but also for the NDCs as well. Yes, please, I would invite you and encourage you to visit our website where you can find more details about this. You will also find a very specific and precise analysis. It's absolutely fascinating. Now let's continue and move on with some of our great witnesses to look at things from above and to look at some feedback. And give the floor to Bakisu Buba from the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus representative. Just to hear really from the indigenous groups and people, what I would like to know really is to know what can we learn from the indigenous people in this particular context and their capacity for resilience in such a crisis at a time like this time.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. Good afternoon to everyone. I am Balkisu Buba, the Vice National Coordinator for the Network of Indigenous People and Local Communities for Sustainable Management of Forest Ecosystems in Central Africa. I'm also one of the focal points for the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus. Today, we'll be talking about Indigenous people and what we can learn from them faced with the COVID-19 crisis. In Cameroon, we were one of the countries that were hardest hit by the COVID-19 in Africa. But we were very fortunate because indigenous communities, they were less hit by this COVID-19. The first thing we have to look at with indigenous people is the fact that they went back to nature, that is going back to nature. Going back to nature in the sense that many of them who were in town, cities, they decided to go back to their villages since we live on the peripheries of the society, we live in harmony with nature. They decided to go back to their villages, go back to the natural environment where they think that they can better strategize together as a community so as to combat this pandemic. So when they went back to nature, what did they do? They decided to use traditional methods, using traditional methods to prevent and also on a curative lane for the COVID-19. What did they do with the traditional knowledge? Because they use mostly spirituality, because the indigenous people, they use spirituality, they use natural plants, and all of these things are found in nature. So they use these things to prevent the COVID-19 from attacking their communities and their people. And thanks to these preventive measures, we have not had any case of COVID-19 in the indigenous communities, either in the forest communities or in the savanna areas. Then also, we use traditional herbs to kind of cure some diseases, because we used to use ethno-veterinary medicines. And these ethno-veterinary medicines, we use them to treat cattle, we use them to treat other animals, so that we cannot have animals transfer disease to the human beings. So we use the herbs, and it was really good. They went on valorizing traditional indigenous knowledge because they realized that they have knowledge that the ancestors have been using for over years, and this knowledge has been protecting
Balkissou,
them. Yes.
Juste si vous pouvez parler un peu plus doucement pour la traduction, je pense que ce sera plus facile. Enfin, un peu moins vite.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
D'accord. Okay, so we valorize indigenous traditional knowledge by using the herbs as the ancestors have always used them. We also use ethno-veterinary medicines so that we can prevent disease from like transferring from the cattle or from any other animals to the human beings. And then the issue of strategizing together with the indigenous communities. They had to come together as a community and then figure out strategies that they can use to combat this pandemic. But what was really disturbing, we had some challenges. The challenges we had was lack of information on the COVID-19 pandemic in local languages. Like, for example, the government put up some barrier measures, and these barrier measures, the information was mostly in English and in French. And because it was in English and French, many of the indigenous communities could not understand would not understand what were these measures and how they can apply the measures. There was also an issue with the police and the putting on of masks, because the face mask became very obligatory, that everyone has to put on a face mask. But many of the indigenous people, since they did not understand the reason behind the putting on of the mask, the police had to brutalize some of them, because they only put on the mask because they're afraid of the police. And once they leave the area where police is found, they don't put on the mask. Some of them wear the mask because some were using reusable masks, and they will use the mask for days without washing the mask. So we took it over ourselves to like translate some of the information in local languages so that they can understand the barrier measures, understand how the pandemic is being transmitted, and how they can prevent themselves. We also did some workshops where we educated them on hand washing mechanisms, so how they can wash their hands and how they can use the gels in case they don't have water. And then we also taught them how to care for their mask. And if they're using mask that expires after every 4 hours, they have to like change the mask. Another issue we're facing is livelihoods of indigenous people are threatened, because their livelihoods are found in nature, and because their lifestyle, their culture, their identity is attached to nature. And because of the current socio-political crisis in the Northwest and Southwest regions, indigenous pastoralists are forced to move. As they are moving towards towns, they are exposing themselves more to the pandemic. And as they are moving towards towns, they are losing their livelihood, because they are losing their cattle, which is a source of livelihood for them, and is also for a cultural purpose. Their cattle are being stolen away, the people are being kidnapped, and ransoms are being asked. So this has made many of them in the Northwest to be forcefully displaced. They have become displaced. They have abandoned their communities. Some of them are in the towns where they have to think about a new lifestyle. And many of them who have not been to school are now thinking of what to do with their lives. They have become some sort of a nuisance in the city. So we are trying to gather, especially the women and girls, train them on alternative livelihoods like sewing. We train them on fabrication of things like soap. We train them on small entrepreneurial skills that can help them to make a living for themselves and for their families. So I think the lessons we can really learn from the indigenous people faced with this pandemic, the first lesson is resilience. Indigenous people are resilient when it comes to a pandemic like this, because they are people who have for a very long time been living in harmony with nature, and they find many of their solutions in nature. So the resilience, and they have kept on transferring the knowledge of their forefathers, the ancestors, down to the younger generations. And the younger generations is also making good use of the knowledge. That is why, faced with the COVID-19 pandemic, they have survived without any issue in Cameroon. In Cameroon, we had only one case where attacked an indigenous person, and this person was in town, if not even in the communities or in the village. There's also the issue of solidarity and unity. As we all know, unity is strength, and solidarity is very important. And indigenous people came up and they decided to work together as a community, as a family, to look for solution helps that can help prevent the coronavirus or any other disease. They share with the other indigenous communities so that together they can all be protected against the COVID-19. Their belief in nature is also what has really saved them, because indigenous people, they believe all their solutions are found in nature. In nature, they can have physical solutions, they can have spiritual solutions, and they have been using the things that nature provide to them to do everything that they want to do, and to have herbs and other things that they can use, not only food, but shelter and everything, they get it in nature. So they get also their medicines in nature. This COVID-19 has also helped them to valorize traditional knowledge, because at first we have the elders who were like the custodians of this tradition, but with the advent of COVID-19, they have been able to pass down this knowledge to the younger generation, and the younger generation have already experimented this knowledge and made some good use of the knowledge to see that it is working, and the solutions they provided, the solutions are really working. So that is what they have been doing. Those are some of the lessons that we can learn from the indigenous communities. And despite the fact that the COVID-19 is here and is a reality plaguing society, the indigenous people have still continued using the traditional knowledge they used before to live in harmony with nature, and also to fight against climate change, because they know that climate change is real, and climate change is affecting them negatively in one way or the other. So they have moved on to some alternative livelihoods, because they know that after the pandemic, there will be like some problems of food insecurity. So some of them started doing agriculture so that they can have food for now and for future, because some of the lifestyles of the indigenous people, they are either pastoralists or hunter-gatherers in Cameroon here. So they are now using, they're doing agriculture so that they can have food security. Some of them are also doing agroforestry, where they can plant maybe fruit trees in the forest so that they can have some fruits in the forest that they are edible. Then there is also the community-based monitoring system that they monitor climate changes, and they use traditional knowledge to also do that. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Balkisu. So yeah, thank you for these inputs, and yeah, we definitely have a lot to learn from the resilience of indigenous people and their relationship and their interaction with nature. Especially, we know that it's most probably because of the interaction of how we interact with nature that this pandemic started. Thank you, Balkisu. Juste, je suis désolé, mais est-ce qu'il y a un problème je vois qu'il y a un problème de traduction. Is there an issue with translation? Did we lose the interpreters? Est-ce que vous êtes là, Dominique? Parce qu'apparemment, il y a un problème sur la traduction.
Ah.
Est-ce que je peux continuer? On peut passer à la suite ou...
Can we continue then? Okay, we can continue. Before going to the questions, I wanted to give the floor to Mr. Mohamed Enbou, who is a special advisor for the General Secretariat of CSG Africa. Mr. Enbou, what we wanted to know from you, Mr. Enbou, as your testimony, from your point of view, how do the collectivities and African cities, were they more resilient to the crisis than other cities? And what is your perception of the reaction of the cities on the African continent during this COVID-19 period? Thank you. So thank you, Renaud. I first of all would like to congratulate Climate Chance for this dynamics that they created with Africa and with all the senators. And indeed, this event is extremely important because it shows to what extent the local collectivities and how they play a crucial role in the fight in times of crisis. And indeed, what has been noticed for Africa is that the pandemic was more or less mitigated in terms of severity, something that we noticed in terms of figures compared to Europe. And I'm not a specialist, of course, of the virus, but from what has been noticed, these local communities have played an important role, and the environment and the lifestyle of the African people has contributed to it. So what I wanted to underline is I wanted to say that local collectivities during this pandemic, the reality on the field has caught up with the politicians, in fact, because the problem, the climate problem in the local collectivities goes through the politicians. And this crisis has shown that the local collectivities are key actors, key, indispensable, crucial players to adjust the variations in terms of crisis, but also to try to relaunch the economy. So after what we have noticed and what we talked about with the president of the association, with Renaud, a dialogue was created, and this dialogue was quite crucial because during this pandemic, it has helped strengthen the dialogue that we had, that we were able to set up, and to see to what extent we can implement a coherent articulation between the national engagements and the local territories. And the chance that we have currently, we are lucky enough in Africa and on the global level as well. Each country has a plan, or these are represented by the local plans, CDMs. And if we go back to the meeting, it was recommended strongly that the economic relaunch plans be totally, and the integration of the NDCs has a strong connotation in the way that there is no single or unique model to duplicate, but everyone must make sure that this restarting of the economy be accompanied and supported by the reality on the field and adapted to it more specifically. So we are in a process or in a debate for the race to zero. We want carbon neutrality. This carbon neutrality also pushes to a strong involvement of local collectivities. Without them, we cannot reach this carbon neutrality because, as you know, the cities represent about 60 or 70% of the green gas emissions, and it is important to accelerate the involvement of the local collectivities and cities, and for everybody to be reaching for the same goals. So there's a very important work that is being done for the convention of Mayors Convention, and with global chance as well, climate chance, sorry. Because with this initiative aiming at structuring the operational framework on the level of the local collectivities, this is articulate around three main actions: the adaptation, mitigation, and access to energy. A first and second phase were achieved for cities to adopt the initiative, and now we are entering a third phase in which the main objective is to how we are going to onboard the great actors, institutions, financial institutions, key players who are important in the climate topic and local collectivities. So it's not about mobilizing cities, but mobilizing players, because this is a phase in which we need action, we need to be active, and financial institutions do represent a key component in this phase 3 that we are in now. There is an event that is going to be organized by Climate Chance at the end of the year. And this materializes, this represents well this mobilization of the different players. Here again, I would like to congratulate the different coalitions, because the coalitions that are being set up, I worked on the Habitat Coalition. It was quite extraordinary because it is through these works, these structuring reunions and work sessions, and we saw the mobility that came out from all this. And it is through these initiatives that we are able to reach the objectives of the Paris Agreement. And I'd like to bounce back on what the president said. I believe that we have the best occasion now, with the United States are going to again respect the Paris Agreement. So they also want to have neutral carbon in the future. And so things are on the good tracks. And this will be declined. There's a multilateral approach, which is fundamental for governments, but also on the level of the cities. All of this is extremely important. Thank you very much, Mr. Nbu. Of course, one of the reasons, to come back to what you said, one of the reasons for which climate chance is in line with the Convention of the Mayors in the sub-Saharan area, it is also to converge towards member territories of this initiative. The players coming from different areas, businesses, etc., to be able to go further in the implementation of the climate plans for territories, and of course collectivities, but other actors as well. And this is what we're trying to do together. This is why we have the importance of the coalition and the work plan for this per sector, so to speak. Thank you very much for participating. Time is flying by and we have only 20 minutes left now. So before giving the floor to Mr. Nigel Topping for his closing remarks, we are going to take a few minutes to answer to some questions. Maybe among the panelists, some of you would like to add something, ask a question to someone. Please let me know. And if not, perhaps we can take a question from others from watching this session. You are very numerous, so please be precise, quick. So none of our speakers want to take the floor. I think participants, you can ask your questions, click on reaction, and you can raise your hand, click on the hand icon if you want to speak, and we can take your question directly.
Oui. Monsieur Nbou, vous voulez dire quelque chose?
Mr. Nbou, would you like to add anything? In fact, I like to take advantage of the fact that we have the champion with us, the high-level champion. It's very important. And we are, in this webinar, you invited non-state actors as well. So I would like to say that climate chance, in fact, for the COP26, we're talking about a day to speak about local collectivities and non-state players. So I would like to know if climate chance is thinking about pushing forward these coalitions and enhancing them for the debates. Are they going to shed a spotlight on these coalitions? I don't know the exact architecture of, but we have heard that there's probably a day that is going to be organized around coalitions. We can ask him the question directly, I imagine. Yes, often there's a summit for collectivities. Yes, the summit during the COP, absolutely. So if I don't have a hand raised, my president wanted to add something, I believe. Yes, absolutely. Before Nigel Topping gives us the closing remarks for this day, I found it very interesting. There's a question that we also have in Europe. We also have common issues, and the testimony we had around risks of people dropping out of school, and namely for young girls. It was very strong, very important testimony. We also today in Europe, with the COVID crisis and the lockdown, we have students dropping out from school as well, and there are not directly climate objectives, but training, education are all also in line. So to add to what was said by Mr. Nbou, I believe that it is important for us to have a discussion with Nigel Topping without asking him perhaps too precise questions for the moment, because I'm not used to hide things, but I speak quite directly normally. But after the semi-failure, or we need to recreate a dialogue between non-state actors and at the level of the state. So it's a complicated dialogue. I'm a spokesperson for the CGU for quite a few years, and I know the difficulties of this dialogue. And I believe that with the COP in Glasgow and the mobilization of the British government during this restart, the relaunch, because with climate change and all the present actors today, without an action from the collectivities, the NGOs, the businesses, there's no action for climate. We need the framework of we need the government, we need everyone, but we need this dialogue with real actors as well who support the actions on the field. And so for the next COP, I hope with the good news we have from maybe the first vaccines are going to appear, and we hope that next year we won't have the same crisis. There will be a new dialogue or a continuity of the dialogue, and I believe that this is extremely important.
Merci.
Thank you.
Du coup, il nous reste
I believe now we have.
finalement, on peut passer aux conclusions.
We can go to the closing remarks with Nigel. I believe we don't have any other questions. So you're the high-level champion, sorry. And thank you for being present today. It's a pleasure to hear your closing remarks. Thank you very much.
On vous entend pas.
Nigel, we cannot hear you. Are you on mute? No, we still cannot hear you for the moment.
Okay, ça va.
Yes, now we can hear you.
Merci. Romain, je vais commencer en français et puis changer en
I'm
anglais.
going to start in French and then move to English. I'm really delighted to be part of this workshop today, and I listened to you, all of my French-speaking friends. My wife is from Quebec, so she's a French speaker as well. I am sure that all these questions of ethnicity, language, all this is important if we are going to work together and trying to learn and how to implement, how to use the solutions to fight against climate change. So I'm going to switch to French now.
Merci beaucoup.
I really would like to thank Climate Chance immensely for not just this dialogue, but for the fantastic work you've been doing in convening all of these coalitions, these thematic coalitions. And I can tell there's a vibrancy and an action orientation, which is so important. And I want to thank all of the speakers, but also I think it was 1,500 people who have been regularly meeting to explore these pathways. I'm really impressed with the work, and it's a wonderful example of what I call radical collaboration. I think many of you know about the role of the high-level champion, but just a reminder for some of you who don't, the role was created in Paris. So it's a French invention, because it's an invention of all the parties to the convention, but it was invented in Paris to recognize the importance, the essential role of non-state actors, of businesses, of investors, of cities, of states and regions, and of civil society. So the role, the honor I have, the first person to hold the role was, of course, Laurence Toubiana. And the second person, Hakem El Vaite from Morocco, which is why the community we work with is called the Marrakesh Partnership. So there's a strong French, Francophone Africa link to the whole history of the work. And I just think there's several reasons why the work is so important. I just listed four. First of all, because governments cannot implement the Paris Accord on their own. I think it was Mohammed who mentioned that. There are many ways in which businesses or local authorities alone have the power, and of course, they have to work together. Also, I think the feedback between state and non-state actors is important. We often call it the ambition loop. You know, when cities and businesses are more ambitious, it makes it easier for the state to be more ambitious. And of course, sometimes the state is required to drive the regulation to raise the floor. I think it's also worth remembering that by having many more people active, not just waiting for one state actor, we learn faster because we can be experimenting in different areas. So I love what I hear today about, you know, a regional pathway and a national pathway and then a sub-national pathway. So all of that, all those nuances allow us to learn much faster. And of course, when maybe a national government is struggling to be as ambitious as the science demands, then non-state actors can keep hope alive. And we see that in more than one country. In fact, I think you could say that non-state actors really have been keeping hope alive in the United States of America for the last 4 years. And I think the speakers have illustrated all of those reasons in their summaries. And this crucial role is why Gonzalo Munoz, the Chilean high-level champion, and I launched the Race to Zero in June. So the first thing I want to say is to all of African friends, please join the Race to Zero. I know that C40 and ICLEI and GCOM are working very closely with cities and local authorities to join. And of course, many businesses can join through the Global Compact or through the International Chamber of Commerce. But we need everybody of every size from every country to join the Race to Zero, because this truly does require the whole of society. And then we need practical steps, which is what you've been telling me about, what I've been listening to and learning. And this week, the Race to Zero dialogues are all about the second publication of the net zero pathways, which Gonzalo Munoz pioneered last year. So I look forward to working through the Marrakesh Partnership with many of you to align the global pathways with the regional and the national pathways as our work really turns to the work of implementation. I did just want to mention Renan and a couple of others reminded me that in Glasgow, assuming we can meet physically, which of course is not certain, but I share your hope that we can. Gonzalo and I, with the Marrakesh Partnership, will have a part of the Blue Zone, part of the space will be dedicated to non-state actors. And we will be having thematic days. We'll be finalizing those in the first quarter, working through with all the Marrakesh partners. So I'm sure there'll be a place for local authorities, but both as their own group, but also, of course, in all the thematic days, whether we're talking about housing or transport or health or energy, the role of non-state actors is so important. I think also something which Gonzalo pioneered last time, and which I know the United Nations Climate Change Secretariat are keen to continue, is to bring more what I would call line ministers. So not just environment ministers, but if we're going to have a conversation about transport, we need representatives of businesses in the transport value chain and cities, and the transport ministers if we're going to talk about transport, and the energy ministers if we're going to talk about energy, and the finance ministers. So yes or no, I hope that will be very much something we continue and go further in Glasgow. And actually, we're also exploring whether we might bring back some of the Talanoa dialogue, which you mentioned, maybe in a slightly different form, but we think we need more of this dialogue between non-state actors and state actors, between non-state actors from different parts of the economy. I've taken away some powerful messages from the speakers. I won't cover everything, but Tara reminded us of both the power and the fragility of relying on digital communication. It made me think that we must think of investments in digital infrastructure as also part of the resilience agenda. I think we've also heard a lot about how climate and COVID both are intensifiers of vulnerability. I love the very local application of this idea of a roadmap. Sylvestre told a really strong story of the Ivoirian example. And I say I'm looking forward to comparing that roadmap with the ones that we're producing with the Marrakesh partners and continuing to improve them over the years. I think also several of the speakers, Titi and Balki, really reminded me of the importance of listening to some of the key voices, the voice of women, the voice of young people, the voice of Indigenous people who have sometimes different perspectives, valuable perspectives, and of course are key stakeholders if we're going to make the kind of transformations that we need to make. Also, Balki, thank you for the reminder that fundamentally this collective work, this responsibility we share is going to require a strong dose of solidarity. So to me, it's perhaps one of the most important ideas at the heart of the Paris Accord is solidarity. So I want to close. This is the first day of the Race to Zero dialogues. I want to thank Climate Chances for putting on such a wonderful dialogue. I thank all the participants. Gonzalo and I are really sad that we haven't been able to visit Africa this year. We had expected to visit twice for the Regional Climate Action Week and then for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. So we're having to learn to pivot to do more virtually. We had an African resilience dialogue a couple of weeks ago. Now this dialogue is wonderful. I really hope that I'm able to visit Africa personally next year. I can tell you that Gonzalo and I are very committed to growing the infrastructure that supports the high-level champions and the Marrakesh partnership so that we have a global infrastructure, because this coordination is hard and we've been asked by the parties to link more to the parties. And we're very aware that COP27 will be in Africa. So we're working already to explore the possibilities of raising the funds to extend our team into Africa next year to really support the work that you're all doing today and to embed it more closely into the Marrakesh partnership, so that by the time we get to COP26, already we can see more momentum from the Marrakesh partnership in Africa that can then flow into 2022 and a year of an African presidency. So with that, I think just reminder everyone, please join the Race to Zero if you haven't already. Please read the Race to Zero Pathways, which the Marrakesh partners are publishing this week. I think David's put the link there. And we really look forward to working with all of you between now and November next year to make sure that COP26 is a moment of solidarity, ambition, and progress so that we can start this crucial decade of delivery with a sense that we really are accelerating the actions needed to solve the climate crisis. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Nigel, pour cette.
Thank you very much, Nigel, for this conclusion. Very energetic, very full of inspiration. I think you summed up very well the key messages that came out, the importance of diversity, the types of actors, the different voices that are heard, but also the concrete contribution that we can bring as non-state actors. The roadmap, as you said, that's crucial. We would be very interested to work in a concrete manner on what we did in Morocco and see how it could be used for the Marrakesh partnership in a clearer way, more precise, how we could work on it together and how the Marrakesh partnership could support new declensions of the roadmaps, new versions of roadmaps in other countries. And I believe I also invite you in the name of our president for the new climate chance, for hopefully face-to-face, hopefully soon. And I invite you to follow our different actions, what we analyze, what we're carrying out, what we're doing. We have a lot to share. And it's always a great pleasure to gather our community every week virtually and hopefully soon face-to-face. So now I would like to say that climate change will soon continue its activities. We are publishing at the end of the year a report of the non-state climate actions. The first week of December, we will publish this report on the analysis of the climate, and we'll have a new series of workshops to present it. So please continue to follow us. Once again, it was a great pleasure to have you all around this table today. And I'd like to wish you a nice rest of the day, and hopefully to see you very soon. Thank you very much.
Merci à tous.
Merci, à très bientôt.
Merci, au revoir.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Au revoir.